Hey, what's up? It's Mr. Dean, and shockingly I've never actually covered a Kirby game on the channel, so I decided to rectify that mistake today with the game that started it all, Kirby's Dream Land. So personally, I am pretty familiar with the latter half of the Kirby series, pretty much everything from Epic Yarn to Forgotten Land. That stretch of games is one of my favorite sets of games of all time, which is what made me so excited to go back to those games that started off the entire series. But yeah, f it, let's just go ahead and have some good old wholesome Kirby Nintendo fun. Oh wait, I probably shouldn't say f in that sentence. I did it again. So the story behind Kirby is pretty straightforward and simple, but also pretty damn fascinating at the same time. So many are familiar with Masahiro Sakurai for his work with the Super Smash Bros. Series, but I always forget that he is also the godfather of the Kirby series. Basically in the early 90s, Nintendo was looking for a new IP that would be a game that anybody could enjoy regardless of video game experience. Sakurai created a simple and circular design for a character for an IP like this, and such a rudimentary design would mesh with the casual basis for the game. Nowadays, Kirby is synonymous with sucking enemies up and taking their ability, however supposedly that wasn't always the vision the game had behind it. The original idea was apparently to have Kirby kick enemies like a soccer ball, and I really want to see that idea to come to fruition now. That'd be pretty funny. The primary ideas that were landed upon for the first game was to have Kirby be able to suck up enemies and spit them out as an attack, and to be able to puff up and float in the air. This served as a contrast against the typical platforming system where falling into a hole would just straight up kill the player and cause a life to be lost. While that could theoretically still be the case in this game, you could easily puff up and fly away in an emergency. This falls pretty well in line with the accessible nature. I'll talk more about that once we get to the game itself. Apparently also during development they used the name Popopo for Kirby, but then they decided, wait, we want this game to sell, so they went with the name Kirby. So upon playing this game for the first time, being someone only familiar with the modern Kirby games, this was such a fun experience. This game is extremely short and to the point. It is only 5 levels, each one ending with a boss fight. There aren't any copy abilities yet, you simply just suck up enemies and spit them out as an attack. This makes it so this game is the simplest gameplay wise, and also in a way weirdly more difficult than what I am used to. It isn't hard to beat the game, but fighting the bosses was slightly harder due to you not being able to utilize a copy ability to your advantage. Also, the soundtrack in this game, much like the rest of the series that would follow this, is absolutely incredible. There are multiple songs from this game that would remain in the series as musical staples all the way until this day. Also, graphically, this game looks really solid for a Game Boy game. Despite being a monochromatic green color scheme, it actually works pretty well and I never got tired of looking at it. Granted, it only took me about 50 minutes to beat the game. I thought it held up pretty well all these years later visually. The levels were overall pretty well designed, however I personally don't find them to be extraordinarily memorable or anything. The only level that was for me was Green Greens, also probably aided by its fire music. The only level that I actively didn't really like was Mount DDD, which was level 5. This is only because it literally just puts you with a miniature remix of each of the previous levels, as well as fighting the boss from each of said level. This is really monotonous, and I definitely would have rathered a new level for this section. I will say though that the fight against King DDD to close out the game was pretty fun. Story-wise, this feels very similar to the premise from the original Donkey Kong Country game. We got King DDD who stole all the fruit and stars from Dreamland, so we need to save the day as Kirby. Very simple story, but I honestly could not care less about this game not having some deep plot line. It really isn't about that at all. And establishing iconic characters like King DDD through this very simple yet charming story is always a plus. For being the introductory game to the rest of the franchise to come, I like what they came up quite a bit. So in retrospect, I know that there wasn't a whole lot that was brought up, but this is like a 45-minute long game. There really isn't all too much for me to bring up. I think that this serves really well as a fun revisit for big Kirby fans to see where the series roots came from in the 90s, but I would not go as far as to say that this is a must-play platforming masterpiece. It is really fun and cool for what it is, just a little bit too short and rudimentary of a Kirby game for me to call it one of the best Kirby games by today's standards. Also, while I did say that this game looks solid for a Game Boy game, I wouldn't necessarily say that it looks good in a vacuum. Like, of course I would rather look at basically any other game in the series over this one, but for what it is, it's alright. It is charming and fun and had an interesting story behind its creation, however I wouldn't call this specific entry one of the greatest games of all time. Anyway, I will definitely be looking at more Kirby games in the future, and I had a really good time reviewing and playing through this one. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, peace out.